we like to practice internet safety. So, because I'm a part of that generation. Hey, welcome back to Road Tripping with Rachel. I'm Rachel and welcome to my channel. So we have been working our way through the book of John. We are now on John chapter 4, which if you are familiar with the Gospel of John, you'll know that this is where we are going to be tackling the situation that Jesus places himself in involving the woman at the well. Now, there is a whole lot of conjecture that comes into this particular chapter of scripture because of the woman at the well specifically. I'll share some of my personal opinions on it, but before we do that, we want to make sure we set the stage and we just review a little bit about what had been happening. So in the previous chapter, Jesus and Nicodemus, they were having a discussion. It's where we get John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. So keep that in mind as we begin to consider this woman at the well who is a Samaritan. Now, to understand really the type of situation and the social expectations and stresses that were facing the culture that Jesus lived in, I would really recommend you go back and read through Nehemiah and the book of Ezra. Now, I happen to really love the book of Nehemiah. Ezra is also a really great book. They are post-Babylonian captivity books where the people of Israel have now been released from Babylon and Persia. They are returning to the land, and they are building the wall that is surrounding Jerusalem, and that's with Nehemiah. And then with Ezra, Ezra is going through and is leading the people as they are renewing their covenant with God. However, in both of those books, we are seeing a lot of the interaction that has to do with what happens when God's people chose to go and do things that they were told specifically not to do. So primarily, this was to intermarry with the people who were there in the land, and not intermarry as in, hey, I married this person and now they have decided that they want to have a relationship with God too, and with Israel, because we do see that previously in the Old Testament. That is what happens with Ruth, that is what happens with Rahab, that is what happens with Tamar in the book of Genesis. So we do have a precedence for people marrying into the Jewish faith and embracing God and becoming a member of the Israeli people. However, that is not what happens in this situation. In fact, it's the opposite. The people began intermarrying in the land to the people who were there, and instead of bringing them to God and worshiping him and teaching them who God was, they were actually joining into a lot of their practices. So they were turning their back on covenant, on the Ten Commandments, and they were moving in the total opposite direction, and they were basically breaking all the rules they possibly could break with it, and then just calling themselves Israelites or Jews at this point. So that's kind of a bit of a background to understand, like, as we're coming into this. So as we're moving through John chapter 4, we are seeing where Jesus has to go through Samaria. So Samaria and Samaritan is both the geographical area where these people who were still living in the land, who had intermarried with the peoples during the Babylonian captivity, had settled, and a Samaritan is one of their descendants. So a Jewish person during Jesus's time would have gone out of their way to avoid this area, because they're basically considered like a pariah. They are not readily accepted within Jewish society at this particular time in history. So Jesus says that, like, he had to go through Samaria, which means that at this point Jesus is on a mission. So Jesus has a purpose, and I think we can all agree that Jesus doesn't do anything without a purpose. And lo and behold, here's this lovely lady who comes out. Now, this is where I said, like, there's a lot of conjectures about, like, who exactly this woman was, because she had been at least married multiple times. Now, I would say there is nothing that necessarily states that she was divorced. in this, although I have definitely heard sermons where it has talked about that. There's nothing really to indicate that she was a prostitute. Like, there's nothing necessarily to indicate that this woman was living really in like a horribly sinful lifestyle, other than the fact that they say like that the man you're currently living with is not your husband. Now, there's a lot that can be read into that and a lot that it indicates. Um, However, I think we do need to go back and look at like what their cultural setting was in order to understand what that statement means. Um, she could have been bought, she could have been a servant, she might not have had a choice in the matter. And I also think if we look at the greater cultural context of just the Middle East at this time, it wasn't like a woman was like going and getting divorced all the time. I mean, she was either being cast aside or she was her husbands were dying, which if you were a younger girl and then were married off to a much older man, that's completely possible. Now, is that normally the approach that we take with this particular section of scripture? No. Do I think it is an approach that we should look at and consider before we make her sound really bad? Yes. So considering the situation that that woman might have found herself in, and honestly, like, we don't know the situation, and I'm not trying to excuse any sin that could have been happening here, in a world that was not friendly to women, if she was presented with an opportunity to be able to have a roof over her head and food in her stomach and know that she was protected, there's a lot that you would be willing to do. That's really all I'm going to say about that. Now, as we continue moving on, regardless of where this woman is at, she was out in the middle of the day. That does kind of seem to indicate that she wasn't exactly the most welcomed of all individuals, regardless of whatever the situation was. And Jesus, similar to the conversation he has with Nicodemus, he starts talking about being the living water. And this woman is like, well, tell me where I can find this living water, and then I won't have to come back here. What's the significance of living water? So living water would mean that it's water that's moving. So it's a stream, it's a creek, it's a river. It's not stagnant. I find this moving water, and Jesus is telling her, like, hey, it's me. So the main point that Jesus really tries to get here is not so much that it matters, like, where you come from, who I was. Like, you wouldn't want to talk to me anyway, and you know that I'm a Samaritan, so you shouldn't be talking to me anyhow. But Jesus comes to them and he challenges like what her beliefs were, because the Samaritan people, because they had that Jewish base and that foundation, they were saying like, well, we worship God on this mountain, so we believe that God's going to come here. Now, they had incorporated a lot of stuff out of like all these other occultic religions that were in the surrounding people groups into Judaism, that they had post-Babylonian captivity. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not the issue here that we're discussing. We're given and told like how you were supposed to approach God, and you know that it is meant to be in Jerusalem. You are choosing to do this other thing. And he gets into this concept that I think we really struggle with today too, is that there are a lot of rules within different denominations, and I do really understand why people my age and even like people who are younger than me and like the Gen Z generation, that they are saying like, well, I don't like organized religion, I don't like the I don't like all the rules and the regulations and all this stuff that's associated with being a part of an organized faith. And it's because there are a lot of stupid rules when we start getting into this idea of, well, you can do this, but you can't do that. Or, you know, women should have like really long hair, or they should only wear skirts, or you should do, you shouldn't have tattoos, you shouldn't have piercings, you shouldn't wear makeup, you shouldn't paint your nails. Just for the record, I am wearing pants. My hair is up. However, my hair only comes down to my shoulders. I am wearing makeup and my nails are done. I also have multiple piercings. And you can't see it, but if you've watched one of my videos, I have a tattoo on my shoulder. So, like, very clearly, like, everything I just listed, I break all of those rules. I'm still a Christian. I still have utter faith in God, and that I am actively involved in my church. I attend church. I read my Bible. I have Christian friends. I do I've been a part of different Bible studies. It's not about the things that you're doing, it's about the heart in which you want to do them. So and this is, I think, the core of what Jesus tries to get at, that if you are a believer, you're going to worship in spirit and truth. And so sometimes that does mean that there is an appropriate way that you are going to be approaching God. In the scenario that we are presented with right here in Scripture, the spirit and truth issue was that these were people who were told the appropriate way to worship God was to be able to go and be a part of the sacrificial system that was set up in Jerusalem where the temple was at. It was not to go up to this mountain and make sacrifices. It was not to incorporate all these different things that were from the Canaanite peoples from when Israel originally moved into the land. That was not appropriate worship for God. Appropriate worship was wanting to do the right thing because God has called you to do the right thing. It is not, I'm going to do this thing because this is what I'm told to do. And if I do this thing, then this is how it's going to turn out. It's the same as, like, you are not a Christian because you go to church. You go to church because you are a Christian. It is not a mathematical proof. You can have one without the other, but if you are a Christian, you're going to want to go to church. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't experience heartache, that you haven't been hurt by a church, that you sometimes do need to take a step back, maybe from being as super involved as you have been previously. And sometimes there are churches out there that are sick. Churches are made up of people, and people are sinful. That does not mean the church as a whole is a bad thing. It means that you probably need to go out and find a healthy church where you can be involved and where you can be serving and where you are being pushed, because iron does sharpen iron, but that also means that there is iron that is sharper than the other one, and that you're rubbing off like those bumps, and that you're using that sandpaper that is sometimes so painful. But that is where Jesus is getting at here with this woman, that you're supposed to be worshiping God in spirit and truth while recognizing that we do have a sinful condition. Was this woman living in sin? Yeah, she was living with a man she wasn't married with or married to. And as a result, this woman does come to faith. Like, she realizes that I am speaking right now to the Messiah. And she goes into this town, this woman who probably really wasn't liked because of some of the choices that she had made. And she's going around saying, listen, like, this man, this is the guy that the prophets had talked about, because they still had this. They knew who the prophets were. They knew what scripture said. Like, we found him. He's here. He's told me the sins that I've committed. Come, meet him for yourself. And at the end of it, Jesus begins to explain that there are people who are ready to hear. The harvest is plenty. That I know that I'm going to appeal to a certain group of people. That doesn't mean I don't want to share with people that I might not necessarily appeal to as a person. I fully know that my personality is most definitely one of those where I'm like, you either like me or you don't. I don't necessarily care either way. That's just who I am as a person. However, that doesn't mean that I don't care about other people. And that Jesus is saying, like, we're all going to have different jobs. There are people out there, their job is to go out and just share with everyone. There are some whose job is to, like, really cultivate. But at the end of the day, we're all working on this harvest, and that we need to be spreading the good news. So if you are a Christian and you're in your small group, I would encourage you to go on ahead. Think about how can we reach out beyond just the church and just inviting people to come to the small group or inviting people to services. What are active things that you can do as a small group or as a Sunday school class in order to go out and reach people? Maybe it's doing a group volunteer project. Maybe it is, as a group, seeing if you can go on a mission trip, or maybe it could even be maybe sponsoring a group to go on a mission trip. Maybe you're not going to be the person who can go on the mission field, but you are the person who maybe has a decent job that you can help to support a kid who's overseas, or you can help get them a Christmas gift. Maybe it's cooking meals and being part of a meal train, or maybe it is just checking on your elderly neighbor, or maybe it is going and volunteering somewhere. So there are different options that are out there for you to share the love of God, be able to present the gospel to people, and be able to just be loving to them when there's a lot of people out there who've been hurt. So this didn't necessarily dig in super deep into the chapter in and of itself. I really just wanted to give you all some things to really kind of think about and discuss amongst yourselves. You can agree, you can disagree, it's fine. But if you are looking to get involved in a good church somewhere, or if you are kind of in that process, I encourage you going ahead and comment, and I'll see if maybe I can get you connected to someone, or you can always reach out to me via Instagram. I do at least look at those. You just need to tell me like how you found me and why you're contacting me. Because there are some weirdos that are out there, and we like to practice internet safety. So, because I'm a part of that generation. So, if you like this video, make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure that you hit all the right buttons so that way you can get these notifications. I do like to do the Bible studies every other week, normally the first and the third Wednesday of each month. So we are trucking along and we are working our way through the Gospel of John. So I look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a great night. Bye.